Question 96 of the Summa Theologia continues the treatise on man. This is of the mastership belonging to man in the state of innocence. And of course, as we've been talking about the last few days, this is about the condition of Adam and Eve in the state of innocence before original sin and the special graces and privileges that they had during that time, all of which were lost after original sin. And of course, we're still suffering the consequences of that today. Article 1 says whether Adam in the state of innocence had mastership over the animals. Did all the animals obey him, like this little dog that's being so obediently petted here in this picture? Interesting what he says here. He says, for his disobedience to God, man was punished by the disobedience of those creatures which should be subject to him. Therefore, in the state of innocence, before man disobeyed, nothing disobeyed him that was naturally subject to him. Now, all animals are naturally subject to man. This can be proved in three ways. Thomas always has lots of ways to prove things. He has three ways. First, from the order observed by nature. For just as in the generation of things, we perceive a certain order of procession from the perfect of the perfect from the imperfect, thus matter is for the sake of form, and the imperfect form for the sake of the perfect, so also is there order in the use of natural things. Now, throughout the Summa, Thomas is a man of order. Things are ordered. Things make sense. Things are not chaotic to St. Thomas Aquinas. There's always an order in everything that he writes about. So that's a principal theme in the Summa. Thus, the imperfect are for the use of the perfect. As the plants make use of the earth for their nourishment, the animals make use of plants, and man makes use of both plants and animals. Therefore, it is in keeping with the order of nature that man should be master over animals. Hence, the philosopher Aristotle says that the hunting of wild animals is just and natural, because man thereby exercises a natural right. Secondly, this is proved by the order of divine providence, which always governs inferior things by the superior. Wherefore, as man, being made to the image of God, is above the animals, these are rightly subject to his government. Thirdly, this is proved from a property of man and of other animals, for we see in the latter a certain participated prudence of natural instinct. I love that, a participated prudence. That means they do the right thing. They operate well. It's not prudent as in a virtue, but they just naturally do the right thing in regard to certain particular acts, whereas man possesses a universal prudence as regards all practical matters. Now, whatever is participated is subject to what is essential and universal. Therefore, the subjection of other animals to man proved to be natural. Article 2, whether man had mastership over all other creatures. Now, we're not just talking about animals, we're talking about angels and I guess plants and things like that. He says, man in a certain sense contains all things. I love this. He contains all things. We are such fascinating creatures. And so according as he is master of what is within himself, in the same way he can have mastership over other things. Now we may consider four things in man: his reason, which makes him like the angels; his sensitive powers, whereby he is like the animals; his natural forces, which like him to the plants; and the body itself, where he is like to inanimate things. So we are like all the creatures of the world. Now in man, reason has the position of a master and not of a subject, wherefore man had no mastership over the angels in the primitive state. So we read all creatures, we must understand creatures which are not made to God's image. Angels are above us, so we don't have any mastership over them, but over the sensitive powers as the irascible and concupiscible, which is interesting because we've only kind of touched on these different passions. Thomas is going to get into this a whole lot more in part 2 of the Summa. These passions obey reason in some degree. The soul has mastership by commanding. So in the state of innocence, man had mastership over the animals by commanding them, as we learned in the last article. But of the natural powers in the body itself, man is master not by commanding, but by using them. And so these are things that, like circulation of our blood or the respiratory system, we don't command them because they just work anyways, right? They just operate. Thus also in the state of innocence, man's mastership over plants and inanimate things consisted not in commanding or in changing them, but in making use of them without hindrance, because the plants don't typically put up a lot of fight when they're told what to do. Whether men were equal in the state of innocence, right? Are we equal in the state of innocence? He says, we must needs admit that in the primitive state there would have been some inequality, at least regard sex, because generation depends upon diversity of sex. All right, so you're going to have both male and female, and so they're different. I don't think he's saying one's necessarily better than the other. And likewise, as regards age, for some would have been born of others, nor would sexual union have been sterile. Moreover, as regards the soul, there would have been inequality as to righteousness and knowledge. For man worked not of necessity, but of his own free will, by virtue of which man can apply himself more or less to action, desire, or knowledge. So not everybody's going to apply themselves exactly the same, so there's going to be a little bit of inequality in that regard, just like there is now. Hence, some would have made a greater advance in virtue and knowledge than others. All right, so there is some interesting inequality here. There might also have been bodily disparity, for the human body was not entirely exempt from the laws of nature, so as not to receive from exterior sources more or less advantage and help, since indeed it was dependent upon food whereto to sustain life. So we must say, according to the climate or the movement of the stars, some would have been born more robust in body than others, and also greater and more beautiful, and always better disposed, so that, however, in those who were thus surpassed, there would have been no defect or fault either in soul or body. So it would not. Everybody wasn't exactly the same. People look different. Some people have been a little bit more healthy. They may have been a little smarter, that kind of thing. So it wasn't so equal that there wasn't any disparity between the people. Finally, whether in the state of innocence man would have been master over other men. This is interesting because this whole issue of slavery, and, even Scripture mentions slavery, and what did St. Thomas Aquinas believe in the 13th century? I find this answer quite interesting. Mastership has a twofold meaning. First, as opposed to slavery, in which sense a master means one to whom another is subject as a slave. In another sense, mastership is referred in a general sense to any kind of subject, and in this sense, even he who has the office of governing or directing free men can be called a master. That'd be like a boss or parents, who have people underneath them, not slaves, but just people that they're directing. In the state of innocence, man could have been a master of men, not in the former, but in the latter sense. So there would not have been any slavery in the state of innocence, right? Since every man's proper good is desirable to himself, and consequently it is a grievous matter to anyone to yield to another what ought to be his own, therefore such dominion implies of necessity a pain inflicted on the subject. So he's saying no slavery. Okay, no bueno. But a man is the master of a free subject by directing him either towards his proper welfare or to the common good. Such a kind of mastership would have existed in the state of innocence between man and man for two reasons. First, because man is naturally a social being, and so in the state of innocence, he would have had a social life. All right, woohoo. Now, a social life cannot exist among a number of people unless under the presidency of one to look after the common good. For many as such seek many things, whereas one attends only to one. And so there would have been somebody kind of in charge of, I guess, the social life and that kind of thing. Secondly, if one man surpassed another in knowledge and virtue, this would not have been fitting unless these gifts conduced to the benefit of others, right? So if somebody had a little bit more virtue or a little bit more knowledge, they might have been a master over a person in the fact of guiding them, leading them, teaching them a little bit. And so in that regard, they may have been master over them, but not in the sense of slavery. Well, that'll do it for question 96. Thank you for journeying through the Summa Theologia with me, one question at a time. God bless you, and see you tomorrow for the next question.